Welcome to the course Culturally Responsive Built Environments. Following our previous lecture on the introduction to conservation and terminology related to conservation studies, today we are talking about the principles of conservation and how these principles have been narrated and have been described in different parts of the world. And especially here I'll be just touching upon the United Kingdom's perspective, especially the historic England's perspective, and as well as the Australian and the Indian side of it. So with various relevant examples, so that one can easily understand what I am talking about these principles and what will be the implications. Very recently, in somewhere around 2015, the English heritage has been renamed into the historic England, following upon various political sequences and defining its own limitations. And historic England, which was earlier referred as a kind of English heritage, and they have set up a kind of document which states the conservation principles, policies and guidance for the sustainable management of the historic environments. Because here we are not just only talking about the identification of a historic environment, but it is more to do about how we can relate with the sustainable management practices. That involves planning, that involves the restoration, the conservation, and the whole aspects of conservation. And what kind of the thumb rules, the kind of principles which one has to abide with. So here, coming to the principle 1, it is the historic environment is a shared resource. I mean, it's very illustrative in the document what I just referred, that it is not just a one man's work or one man's monument. It is about a shared resource. So what it talks about is, because our environment where we live, it contains a unique and dynamic, it keeps on changing, a dynamic record of human activity. Like for instance, you take any city, you have a colonial establishment, before that the Mughals. So there is obviously in time there is certain activities goes on in place and different meanings have been produced. It has been shaped by people responding to the surroundings they inherit and embodies the aspirations, skills and investment of successive generations. For instance, if you take in India, once the marble was not easily available, but then now if you look at after the Mughals, after the Mughal period, the importing the marble and the craftsmen related to the marble as a material skills, obviously they have been transferred from one generation to another generation. The second thing which we talk about a shared resource is people value this historic environment as a part of their cultural and natural heritage. So for instance, just a few days before, I visited Pulicat Lake, which talks about, it's one of the important water resources near Chennai, and how that whole resource is now, and I mean the water resource, natural beauty, is a home for many migrant birds, and they travel for about 6,000 kilometers for their breeding purposes and the reproduction purposes. And now, because of various encroachments and developments happening surrounding to the lake areas, obviously it is endangering these kind of species. So which means, why I'm telling about this particular thing, it is not that whole place is determined and the people valued it because of its natural surroundings, it was natural setting. It reflects I think we also discussed about how the myths have been translated in the case of Govardhan, and how the Krishna and his life and his childhood and how he celebrated his life have been narrated as myths and passed down to generation, and how it has transplanted some beliefs and customs and traditions of diverse communities. So in the previous classes, we have already discussed about the more of a landscape component, the enacting landscapes, the sacred landscapes, and how these are all transferred from these customs and traditions make a kind of foundation to give certain identities. It gives distinctiveness, meaning and the quality of the places in which we live. So all these together collectively framing as structures that defines the identity of a place. It could be a social and economic asset and a resource for learning and enjoyment, because these what we talk about Govardhan, it is not just mythological stories, but we are learning a lot from this. It is telling a lot of information. And then each generation we are talking about, because the decades pass on, the centuries pass on, the generation should therefore shape and sustain the historic environment in ways that allow people to use, enjoy and benefit from it. Just imagine if, I mean, that is where we are actually facing the difficulty of how these natural resources, how these cultural resources are day by day degrading, because that is where the transfer of this particular knowledge, skills and the learning, how it is passed on from generation to generation, and how we can learn from these historic environments, what we can learn from this, what kind of lifestyle, what kind of living traditions, right? So that is what it says, that yes, because we are giving it for the future, at the same time without compromising the ability of future generations to do the same. So we all have enjoyed good resources, but then what about our future? So how we can hand over this particular resource to our future generations? Heritage values, because when we talk about conservation, the principles of conservation, values is one of the most important thing we have to keep in mind. It could be a kind of aesthetic value, it could be a kind of the way how people have lived, the economic value into it, and it could be a cultural value. So the value makes that represents a public interest in places regardless of ownership. And the use of law, public policy and public investment is justified to protect that public interest. Today, why we talk about Jaipur, the pink city, and how we talk about the controlling of its facades and the buildings and the development control, because that directly talks about a policy and the investment and the control mechanism. And similarly, even in the modern times of Chandigarh, how there's a development control, and especially around when the new heritage listing has been done, and how it has an inferences with the surrounding development control. And advice and assistance should be available from public sources to help owners sustain the heritage in their stewardship. So it is a shared resource, as we talk about, because we associate the way we lived, the way we have used, but we have to keep in mind that it is also for our future. So we have to have a control on how we use it, how we benefit those kind of historic resources. The second principle which talks about is everyone should be able to participate in sustaining the historic environment. When we know how to learn that we learn from the historic environments, and it is not just only we have to get engaged into protecting and the management of these historic environments, because everyone should have an opportunity to contribute his or her knowledge of the value of places and to participate in decisions about their future by means that are accessible, inclusive and informed. Because see, imagine I showed you in my previous classes about Shakespeare in Stratford-upon-Avon. So how the Shakespeare works has been performed in the streets of the city center, and how they have been telling stories, and many poets, many writers also come and participate in those kind of plays. So which means each one of them, they are coming and they are putting their share in taking that knowledge to the next generation. I mean, at the age of 70, even the old people come and they dance and they celebrate. So there is a ways how we participate in the decisions about their future. And as I said, the whole important crux is the learning. The learning is central to sustaining the historic environment, because the moment we are learning, the process in how we are actually produce these learning processes, that is where it raises people's awareness and understanding of their heritage. So how many cities or towns in India we do have some heritage walks? Because even a small walk takes around the city or in the historic places, that talks about the newcomers to the city or the coming generations. They are learning through these walks. They are learning through these, what is the prominence of these places, how they have been transformed, and so that it gives a kind of awareness, including the very ways of which its values are pursued by different generations and communities. It encourages informed and active participation in caring for the historic environment. So for instance, this is our duty, that we share the value of these historic environments even with our kids. For instance, I'll just share you a small experience. When I started working in Roorkee just 2 years before, I could see a lot of historic buildings, the dwellings around, and the very pre-colonial buildings, and even during the colonial time, the very good traditional buildings in the old Roorkee. And then I went for a walk one day, and all the narrow alleyways, some of them are in very dilapidated conditions, some of them are sustaining, some of them have been partitioned into different small houses, and many families are living. So I could able to find a group of diverse ways of how these traditional dwellings are sustained. And then one day when I was teaching a course on architectural and urban conservation, I took my students for an early morning walk in the old city of Roorkee. And because these kind of walks has helped the students to learn about the city which they live, to learn about like a doctor's house, a Sanjay Goyal's house, or any. They could able to find even a temple in a house, so which has the front way connecting to their street and the back side connect to another street. So which even the people living in Roorkee are not aware of that particular dwellings, which are located in the heart of Roorkee, almost in the heart of Roorkee. So this is where I feel that one has to experience those places, one has to get some kind of awareness of these places. So we need to do our bit of giving that kind of awareness. And not only that, maintaining the cleanliness, maintaining the premises we have to honor those places, we have to respect those places, and even throwing a dust. Instead of dustbin, normally people throw the papers or the rubbish just nearby. So you should value it, because how it deteriorates the place. What kind of maintenance has to be taken on. And experts should use their knowledge and skills to encourage and enable others to learn about, value and care of the historic environment. Experts, it might vary from a technical side to the social side of it or the political side of it. So they also have to make their own efforts how we can value this, because that is where the whole communication of the heritage and what are the kind of potential risks we have and how we have to protect this heritage and how we can establish and re-establish the value of the places, so that it can help the people to refine and articulate the values they attach to the places. So it is essential to develop and pass the specialized knowledge and skills necessary to sustain the historic environment. Like in Uttarakhand, as I said, I showed you earlier in the disaster case also, where the wooden buildings today, they are all surviving, but because of lack of craftsmanship, many of them are deteriorating day by day. So one has to look at this, how we can enrich these specialist skills so that we can conserve these traditions, these building skills. Understanding the significance of places is vital, because how one will understand these places, it is not just only the buildings, like it also talks about the crafts, it also talks about the arts. And in fact, for example, in Andhra, we go to Kondapalli Toys, the toy making business. That place is remembered and visualized with the toys, the toy making as a cultural economy. Similarly, I was in Lefkara, it's a small Greek village in Greek part of Cypriot and Cyprus, and the whole business is all about the trade. The economy is about the lace making and the embroidery component, and the women sit in front of their houses every day evening, and they view, they do the embroidery work and the lace making work, and then how these cultural economies have a role in defining one's communities and this place. And sometimes even right now, if you're talking about the GI tag, the geographical association, and because of its uniqueness, like today Darjeeling tea is also known, because why we are talking about Darjeeling tea or Assam tea? Because of its the quality, or because of its the origin and the nature, and how. And today in Kyoto, how the Kyoto, even the food is considered in the heritage component, because the way the culinary heritage is also taken into an account. So that significance of these places, how one can understand this, who values the place and why they do so. Because today, if you are going for Kanjipuram, Kanjipuram is known for its silk saris, and Benares, it's known for its religious practices and the religious assemblage of both the rivers Varna and Assi, and also the Benares silk. So every place has its own unique characteristics, which is determined by its, maybe by its economic reasons, by its social reasons, by its cultural reasons. Today, when we talk about Pongal, where in Madurai we call about Jallikattu, which is a kind of cow sports, right? So bull sports which they conduct, and similarly in Spain we talk about the tomato festivals. And so basically they're all remembered, these places are remembered by their events, by their occurrence of certain practices which are performed maybe annually or at particular periods, and particular trades which are developed regionally. How those values relate to this fabric, their relative importance, and whether associated objects contribute to them. As I said, yes, the silk saris, that is how they are known, because they can easily, you have a lot of silk saris, but still one can easily say that this is from Benares, this is from Kutch, this is from Chanderi silk, and this is from Benares, this is from Kanjivaram. So each of the silk pattern, each of the design is very unique by its nature, and that is how people determine. Because today Kanjivaram is known for its silk because of its fabric and the kind of art it has developed. The contribution made by the setting and the context of the place, and how the place compares with the other sharing similar values. For example, I just told you how the Chanderi and the Benares and Venkatagiri or the Kanjipuram, all of them are known for this sari making, but then how they still compare themselves by their own unique determinants. Significant places should be managed to sustain their values. So here we talk about one has, because of the moment we are talking about the conservation decisions on what kind of decisions we could make of. So first thing is we have to talk about the judge how its heritage values are vulnerable to change. Take the actions and impose the constraints necessary to sustain, reveal and reinforce those values. The third point, which is very important, is mediate between conservation options. If action to sustain one heritage value could conflict with action to sustain another. Like on the left hand side, what you see is the Babri Masjid. Now we see that the heritage in conflict. So on one side we are talking about the Ram Janmabhoomi, the Rama's birthplace, and the other side we are talking about collapsing Babri Masjid, and because here it is one identity is opposed with another identity, and that is where this is a very tricky option. I'll tell you another story of it, whether it is, if not, it's a kind of understanding late in 1947, where there was an Indologist conference in Oxford, where they talked about locating Lanka. And here, if you look at it, there are various theories which talks about how to locate Lanka. And one of the theory also talks about the Ayodhya, which we refer the Janmabhoomi, the Ram birthplace. They also talk about in Thailand also they have a version of Ramayana, and they refer that because their king's name is also Rama 1, Rama 2, Rama 3, and they also have some ideological stories like saying that Ayodhya was also somewhere related to Ramayana. So it is Ayodhya on the right hand side, which you see a kind of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. which often gets into risk of the floods. And so here, that is where, when these kind of traditions, on one side we are talking about the conflict with opposing with each other, and the second context, we have to talk about how these heritage is getting into risk. So how to protect these things? So that is where these places has to be managed to sustain their values, not at the cost of other, but it has to get its authentic values, and that is where take the actions and impose the constraints necessary to sustain, reveal, and reinforce those values. So how we can reinforce those things? So that is, it takes back to the kind of political motives as well, and even to the national identity. Decisions about change must be reasonable, transparent, and consistent. So when we talk about the Taksim Square, we have discussed a lot about how this military barracks in Taksim Square has been now proposed as a new development, similar to the way the Gaji Park has been. Earlier, this military barracks has been converted damaged, and Gaji Park was there almost 40 years, and now they are proposing a new center similar to that. Then how people have responded to it. So that is what, when we are talking about touching any historic buildings, the decisions about change must be reasonable, transparent, and consistent. The last principle is about documenting and learning from decisions is essential. So we have to document a record of what kind of decisions are taken, why they are taken, how they are taken, what is the criteria. It is not just someone's imagination. It has to go in a concrete documented process. And then as a part of my teaching strategies in conservation, architecture and urban conservation for MArch students, I used to, because to get this experience in the practical sense, so we need to I normally take them to the sites in Bhopal, and we did a combined workshop with IIT Roorkee and the School of Planning and Architecture Bhopal. So visited a lot of sites of Bhojpur, Ashapuri, Bhimbetka, Sanchi. So Bhimbetka and Sanchi are the World Heritage Sites, and Bhojpur and Ashapuri are also under the ASI. So when we talk about the Bhojpur, you can see that how even the rock drawings, how even the map of the temple was drawn there, and you see how to protect these, even the quarries of how they used to manufacture, the sculptors, how they used to train here. So this is a monument. So here we are not talking just a monument as only the heritage component, but we also have to talk about the larger site. So here the second component we have taken is the Ashapuri, which is about 56 temples, about their ruins. It's a ruin site, and Professor Adam Haddy and along with SPA Bhopal, they all have worked on documenting this particular project as a part of their conservation studio. And what you see here is part of the remains are under the water. So Adam Haddy has actually worked taking out the salvage archaeology, and especially they put the ropes here, and then they mud it, and then they take those pieces and then they stack them in a same order. So in that way, that is the kind of techniques which the students have learned. And also, especially how we can actually, the construction, how we can actually interpret based on the ruins and based on the artifacts which are available on these ruin site, how one can elaborate on the nature of the kind of temple which they have planned. So these are some of the drawings which the students have developed for this particular project, Temple 70 reconstructed plan. So based on these evidences, they tried to be based on Nagara style architecture and the evidences they have received, they found in the site. So they tried to reconstruct as an understanding. And similarly, in order to get the importance of these local villages, how the because earlier the villagers were only seeing it as a kind of barren site and nothing is there, only just the ruins. So there is no value coming into this. So in order to make a attachment, how we can bring awareness, so they started constructing a museum in the village itself. All these remains were placed in the museum, and this temple 12 has been partly erected just to symbolically represent. And in that way, having a museum in the village, in the proximity, so the villagers also get to know what is Ashapuri, what is happening there. And similarly, in Australian context, Australian Heritage Commission also, they talk about 10 steps. A few of them I just note down. Conservation is based on respecting all heritage values of the place without unwarranted emphasis on any one aspect at the expense of others. This is what I talked about, even the example of Babri Masjid and some even the Nicosia aspects which we discussed in the previous lectures. Conservation of place should include provision of its security, maintenance, and future. Because we have to talk about the continuous management of it, and also the security, because there's a value. Tomorrow someone takes away these stones and sell that in the Western markets, and they sell it for millions. But here the richness of our own culture is lost. Conservation should involve the least possible physical intervention, do as much as necessary and as little as possible. And conservation of a place should make use of all disciplines and experience. So it is a multidisciplinary approach. It is not just an architectural orientation only. Conservation requires accurate recording. It is not about an approximate. It is accurate recording about decisions and changes to the place. So what decisions have been made, when and how. And again, we talked about the threats, where threats or potential threats or serious or exist. Lack of full scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponing measures to prevent degradation. So we need to act upon these kind of threats and risks. In Indian context, where we talk about the ASI, especially the National Policy for Conservation of the Ancient Monuments, Archaeological Sites and Remains, which is protected by the ASI, Archaeological Survey of India. So if one can go through this document, you will see the most of the principles and the conservation approaches, and also the other aspects related to these heritage sites. Functionally, mainly the ASI talks about the functions of archaeological department are two. One is conservation and the investigation. Conservation principles. The principle one, we talk about, it is not only just within the building or a monument, it is about around the monument, because a lot of rich evidences do exist, number one. Number two is the surrounding nature, the urban form or the built environment should also have to complement with these heritage environment. So why we have to do is prolong its life and existence, prevent its damage and deterioration. Imagine you construct an industrial building next to a heritage sector, how it will deteriorate. Like today you see in Taj Mahal, what kind of impacts due to the industrialization processes. Minimize the impact of external agents of decay, and both natural and human induced, on its setting, structure and material, and prepare it for natural or human induced disasters. The one example I showed about the Ayodhya. Like as I said, in Bhojpur, this is not just a temple we have to focus about, this is a larger site. How rich evidences do take in the larger site. So we have to talk about that buffer aspect, how we can protect that site. Like in Bhimbetka, you can see that kind of, earlier they used to call a kind of core zone and the buffer zone. So you have the caves here, and which is the real, and then you have the buffer zone, which also have some legal instructions into it. When we talk about buffer, this is a very tricky concept to really define what is buffer and how the legal implications onto it and how they differ by national levels. So a lot of discussion has been held, and especially with the international expert meeting on 2008, they have conducted in the World Heritage Buffer Zones, and one can refer. Here you can see the request the World Heritage Center and advisory bodies to use the term property and buffer zone in all documentation, and to stop using the term core zone. So which means there's a little confusion in that whole terminology. So people, the UNESCO and all other agencies or the World Heritage organizations, they're all engaged, and they're discussing about how to use these terminologies to avoid confusion and jargon, how to frame certain legal implications. Similarly, in principle 2, when we talk about, we have to, a monument or an archaeological site should be minimum, as in the Australian records also talk about, so as to maintain its authenticity and integrity. And you can see here that whatever in Sanchi, you can see that whatever you have replaced, that has to be slightly differ with it has to show which has been restored. And here the ceiling of Bhojpur temple, I think they have made some kind of restorations here, and which has to clearly tell the audience that yes, this has been modified. And for that, one has to do a thorough investigation. Even in a Bhojpur, what happened was, like, there was on the rocks there were maps drawn on it, but when they want to protect those maps, even SPA Bhopal have worked on tracing all these forms and everything, but then they put there was a kind of acrylic sheet cover, but then later on, due to sun radiations, it started, they found that it started affecting. So we need to be careful and do a thorough scientific investigation before making any kind of, so later on they removed those sheets and now they just put a small barricade. But still a lot of scientific ways one could explore how to protect these places. Now, in principle 3, when we talk about to retain its value and significance, is authenticity and integrity, and its visual connections to and from the monument. So when we are talking about a heritage structure in a city, obviously when you are planning some building, obviously if you are making a tall towers next to it or something, which is blocking the view, or which is how we can perceive the city and how we can look at the heritage. So how heritage can reflect the identity of the city. So like for example in Turkey, if you go, the view of Galata Tower can be seen from whole Istanbul, almost from all parts of Istanbul, because that is how the visual connection is also creating some links. The Blue Mosque and that structures are how they are able to have that kind of view. So that is where the urban development have a role in controlling it. And not only here, like for instance, if you look at in Sanchi, there are some statues, the Buddha statues, the head has been cleared out. They would have easily replaced it, but then there is a memory, there is a story behind it, how people associate why that head, because the moment you see that picture, the question comes in mind, why that head is taken out. So in that way, it connects a story, it connects a place and its people. And the conservation of a monument is a continuous process. Adequate resources, human and financial, should be made available to conserve it for posterity. So for conservation is an expensive deal. It's a time-taking process. It's not a building project which could happen in one year or half a year. It will take sometimes 4 years, sometimes 10 years, but it takes manpower, it takes skilled labor, it takes a thorough investigation process. And for that, which you need a financial support. And conservation under no circumstance be based on any conjecture or artistic imagination. Like for instance, we discussed on Grimm's Pound. It could have been, people would have reconstructed in the same way of an artistic imagination, but they didn't do it because they still remained it as what they have got it. So that is where, whether it is true or not, we cannot ascertain it. And similarly, conservation, it is a multidisciplinary approach, because people from geology, we talk about Pitalkhora caves, how geologists have worked on it, and how the landscape architects can work on it, how the planners can work on it. So it's a multidisciplinary approach. And the conservation of the original historic material should be aimed as an essential prerequisite to sustain the time dimension of a monument, which confirms its antiquity and faithfully maintains its authenticity. Today, why we are talking about Bhimbetka caves? Because of the prehistoric settlements, how these rock paintings, how they are talking about those lifestyles, because that is a rich evidence which we are getting. And even a small rock painting is of much value for us, because that is it has a universal value, and we need to protect those kind of things. And whatever the restorations, we are principle number 8, we are talking about the restoration, consolidation, reproduction and retrofitting. And so whatever we are doing on these this is in some of the places in Khajuraho, where whatever the places they have reconstructed, it has to be visible that which part has been restored and how. So it should be able to clearly distinguish which is the original and which is a restored component. Even in Ocha, you can see that some of these cenotaphs have been restored, and still the kind of landscape gardens which they have made, so that it attracts the tourist, and as well as it should not dominate that historic context. And the main thing is the decision of achieving such objectives should be carefully recorded and documented for posterity. Like, this is one example of Raja Rani Mahal in Chanderi, where Intac have taken up the restoration, and Ramesh Bole was working on this. You can see that these are the new stone slabs which are done again. The craftsmen have been employed, and they have put on a metal frame, and the whole Raja Rani Mahal has been restored. It took maybe 4 to 5 years to restore, but now the purpose what they are doing is how the digital prints of the saree making, the traditions of the silk saree making, and how they can digitize, and how they can how these old places can also use for the new uses. So this is one good example of requalifying old spaces for new uses, and this is where conservation plays an important role, both accommodating the old and new. Thank you.